It's a privilege for me to welcome you this afternoon to the sanctuary of the Loma University Church. It's a privilege to sponsor this event between the church, the School of Religion at Loma University, and the HMS Richards Divinity School at La Sierra University. We're delighted to have each of you here for this time together with Professor Friedlander, and we want to welcome him. He will be introduced in just a couple of moments by Dr. Sigve Tonstad. I want to say a special thank you to Sigve for his work. If it had not been for Sigve and what he's done, we wouldn't be here this afternoon. So he has put in a tremendous amount of work and effort and energy into this occasion, and we are grateful to him for that. I wish I could look around the entire audience here and pick out different ones of you to welcome, because I knew everyone here, but I cannot do that. I see many new faces, and we're pleased to have you here. But there's one face that is a friend to this congregation of not years, but of decades. And I would like to, in a special way, welcome Rabbi Hillel Cohen. Rabbi Cohen, we're delighted to have you here. And now I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Sigve Tonstad, who will introduce Professor Friedlander and carry on with the program.
It is an enormous privilege for me to be here with Professor Saul Friedlander. So, people who experienced the Holocaust are victims, but some of those people are also mentors. And I am introducing a person who has been a victim, but also to me, a mentor. And I am so glad that I can share him with you, with the Loma Linda community. It is late for us to do this, but let it be better late than never. So Saul Friedlander was born in Prague in 1932, just before Hitler came to power in Germany. As he says in his book, it was the worst of times to be born in some ways. At age 6, the parents, with their only child, fled to France and spent the next several years in France until, in 1942, the Nazis started deporting the Jews in France to Auschwitz. At that point, he was put in a Catholic monastery, and the parents tried to flee to Switzerland, but were stopped at the border and were deported to Auschwitz. And we will hear some of that story from him. And so after the war, he had been baptized as a Christian and had to retrieve his Jewish identity. I will make the rest short. We printed up 300 programs for you to have, and that was not enough. I would have been happy for 300 people here. I am quite awed that this community had it, that you have it in you to be here this afternoon. I think this is really wonderful. Saul Friedlander is, in my view, the greatest historian of the Holocaust. The way he describes it, the richness of detail, and the way he conceptualizes the evil that was at that time. And so he has written his own story in these two books, When Memory Comes and Where Memory Leads. That's the personal account. And then we have these two books here, Nazi Germany and the Jews, the years of persecution and the years of extermination. Yeah. And for the last of those books, he received the Pulitzer Prize in 2008. He has received many, many prizes. He is very well connected in academia, in circles of government, and so on. And in 2019, he addressed the German Bundestag in relation to the memory of the victims of National Socialism. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much. So we are putting on the screen here a picture of you. Let's see if we can get it on the big screen. I think this is you at age 6.
More or less.
And were you in France at the time and then, or you were
No,
still?
that's the last time in Prague, I think, before we left. I look maybe a little bit older than 6, but that is that, yes.
And
it's in Prague.
in that connection, you have said in your second book, Where Memory Leads, you say, I remember the monstrous sounds of Hitler's threats against Czechoslovakia in his broadcast speeches in 1938. I remember the sense of ending and my truncated first school year. Could you say a little?
Yes. This famous, infamous Hitler speech at the very end of the crisis of the Sudetenland, which was ended in Munich agreement, and then the whole thing didn't last very long. It turned quickly into the occupation of Czechoslovakia and of the Czech state, actually, which became the protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. That was the end of my few months at school, an English school, a school in English, because all the students there, first year students, were of families, not only Jews, by the way, but mostly, who wanted to leave and thought that English would be, at home we spoke German and Czech, and that's what I knew. And English, I started English in that school. Well, to come back to the Hitler speech, he threatened, and he spoke of the German refugees chased by the Czech. Und es waren 10.000, nächsten Tag 20. That was, and it went on and on and on, like a locomotive, the old-time train, do you say locomotive?
Yeah.
Puffing and shouting.
So that
it remained with me to this day.
Amazing. So I have another picture here. Let's see if we get it on the big screen too. So I understand that this is you with your parents at a train station.
Yes,
but not in
that
relation
was
to...
before.
That was before.
We were on our way. I had been quite ill at age 3, and here it was probably very shortly after my illness. I had an operation of both ears, mastoiditis, and so that's why today I don't hear anything without my hearing aids. So that was still in Czechoslovakia, probably near where we lived when not in Prague, in Oberrochlitz, which is in the Sudeten. I experienced, if I may say, but that's not very clear in my mind, the onrush of the Sudeten crisis, and we were chased from our home to Prague, and then from Prague, yeah.
But that was the time when Nazi Germany started expanding.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, exactly. So let's see, I will show a map here that will show that you traveled from Prague to Paris in 1939.
39.
Yes. and then you stay in Paris for a while, and then you go to the south of France, to Montluçon.
To the center of France.
To the center of France, yes.
We stayed in Paris for a while. I mean, we arrived in April 39, and we ran away, if I may say, or we fled in June 40. The Germans had entered Paris, so we couldn't stay there. It was too dangerous.
It wasn't safe in the Paris area, so you went further south.
It wasn't safe in the whole area which the Germans occupied.
Yeah.
That is the whole north of, center north of France, and Paris, of course, and to the Belgian border, and Belgium. But we fled to the Vichy zone. That is the area which was under a so-called autonomous French government, Marshal Pétain, whose name is probably known to many of you, who collaborated officially with the Germans, but still it was somehow, it wasn't exactly under direct German domination until November 1942, when the Germans took over the whole of France.
So at that time, you were separated from your parents.
Well, it went that way. My parents, they thought they could get to Switzerland. And I remember those days extremely well because it was very defining for me. It was September 42 when the anti-Jewish laws were applied in all harshness, also in that part of France where we were. So my parents had sensed that. I mean, they had to go in any case every week to the police station in the little place where we were living. And I stayed at home. They did listen to the BBC at night. That was very dangerous, but most refugees, there were a lot of Jewish refugees in that little place, listen to the news or exchange information under covers and so on, so that the Germans actually could find where it was taking place, but we were safe until then. Well, then my parents had to give me up because they would go to Switzerland, they hoped so, and they hoped that I would join them later under a false passport. Well, nothing of that happened. Let me say what happened to them first. They reached, you want to?
I want to show it on the map. Show it on the map what you will say.
Okay.
I will, if you don't mind, read this statement from your father,
Yes.
where he writes to the monastery, "It is with gratitude that I consent and formally authorize you to baptize him." So there you are taken care of in a Christian context, and they make you,
We both went to that city, Montluçon, in the center of France, which was still under Vichy regime at that time. They went to the hospital and to hide there. My father had a very bad stomach, an ulcer, so in any case, he needed medical help. By the way, there were no medication at the time. You couldn't buy medication. Pharmacies didn't have them. In any case, not for Jews. So And I was given to the protection of a lady who was Christian, Catholic, but born Jewish. That I didn't know until after the war. But in any case, she passed me on to a priest who came specially from Montluçon to Néry, and he took me to the seminary. It was a seminary. It was pretty awful for me at the beginning. As you are all more or less linked to medical school or to, I can tell you that the first night, it was the end of summer, but there were some pupils already there. And I was so distraught that I went some 40 times to the restrooms, and the whole dormitory was put on a diet at that time. That is, they had nothing to eat for a while because of me, but nobody knew I was the only one who did that terrible chaos. In any case, there I hated the place, and somehow I knew my parents were in the hospital. I had heard it probably. So I ran away from the seminary. I found the hospital. I found my parents' room. Under what name they were there, I don't know. But they couldn't have been under their own name, Friedlander, because Jews were hiding and not with their own name. So whatever name they had, I knew it. I found them, I found the room, I found them. And of course, I embraced them and didn't want to leave. They were 2-3 days from leaving for Switzerland. And they had to phone to the seminary, and I was holding the bed, never mind, taken away and taken back to the seminary. And that starts another chapter, but should I tell what happened?
Yes, so then I just put it on the map here. So we see Switzerland and France and Lake Geneva here, and that's where they tried to cross into Switzerland.
Yes, exactly. At Saint-Gingolf, which is a town half Swiss, half French. So they came from France, from the Savoie, into Switzerland. And with a group of 15 Jews who had come through the mountains, and they were afraid that this would be too much for me. So that, in that sense, they had been right until then. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, when they were going through the only street along the lake from France to Switzerland, a group of youngsters came out of a bar, saw them, understood these were Jews, phoned the police came, caught all of them. But that day, and for a few days, those with children were left into Switzerland. Those without children were pushed back to the French police, that is over the border. My parents and another couple were those who had no child with them. Had I been there, we would have gone through on that specific date, which shows you that this whole period and what happened at all levels was a matter of chance. Now, you may think otherwise, but that's how I understand it, a matter of pure chance. In any case, I was back in the seminary, and my parents were pushed back with the other couple to the French police, who took them, kept them.
So I will advance the map now. So just to stay on the map. By the way, here I have a quotation from When Memory Comes. We reached Switzerland. That's where your parents are writing that they have been arrested. And then they say that if there is the slightest possibility of helping us, do not hesitate, we beg you, act quickly. There must be a solution at Vichy that could be less catastrophic for us. And then about you, don't forget the little one. And I will advance the map again and show the route that your parents had to take when they were captured from up there in the Swiss border, and then, as far as I understand your book, then taken all the way to almost to the Spanish border.
Yes.
And then from there to outside of Paris.
Yes, I have to explain
yes.
that. They were taken to a French concentration camp. France had established some 4, 5, 6 camps along the Pyrenees Mountains and close also to the Mediterranean. But they were in a camp along the Pyrenees, Rivesaltes, which was established in 40, before the Germans invaded, to put foreign citizens, mostly people who came from Germany or German-occupied Europe. They were considered enemy aliens. I mean, the Jews who had fled from Prague, let's say, or Berlin, or wherever, to France were considered now as enemy aliens because they spoke German or what. In any case, the camp was named Rivesaltes, and that's where they were put. It was pretty bad. People died there every day. But it was a concentration camp. Let's leave it at that, but established by the French for mostly German Jews, German or Czech and so on. And from there, they were taken to Drancy, which was the main assembly camp before being deported. That is, the Germans were very well organized, as we all know, and they had established a camp near Paris where the Jews from various camps like Rivesaltes and 4 or 5 others were sent to this Drancy. And there, from Drancy, mostly from 41 onwards, 42, of course, every week a transport of 1,000 went to Auschwitz and to a gas chamber.
So the route taken that they took your parents is one of the longest journeys to Auschwitz, all the way down and then north and then going east again. Now, on that last leg of their journey, when they go to the end there, so they will go here. That's where it will end. But I have a statement from your parents there in the letter. That was
in
thrown,
the letter.
Yeah, that was thrown from the train. It is
yes, but that was their thought that they were in a train to Germany. They were in the train to Drancy.
Okay, all right. But I think it's still meaningful. I'm writing this in the train that is taking us to Germany. At the last minute, I sent you through a representative of the Quakers 6,000 francs. Keep all this for the little one, and accept for the last time our infinite thanks and our warmest wishes for you and your whole family. Don't abandon the little one.
Yeah.
And it sounds like they don't think they will see you again. Or how did you think about that when you found this letter?
I don't know what they thought in that train to Drancy and what they thought when they realized that they were in a train from Drancy to Poland. They didn't know what Auschwitz was, I guess. But they knew that to be sent to the East was not something positive. They didn't know about extermination. Very few people knew that, except those who were in touch somehow with Nazi Germany. But they sensed probably that I don't know what I don't know what they thought. I don't know what they talked about. Imagine what they had made mistake after mistake after mistake by pure chance. And,
so I'm going to switch a little to your two big books on the history of the Holocaust. So here you say, that's in the second book, on December 6, 1941, the Chelmno gas vans had become operational. And just for our sake of orientation, I want to show a picture of the gas van. So, and this is from Chelmno. This is a city in Poland.
Near Lodz.
North Lodz, yes.
Yeah.
And the gas vans at Chelmno, that was the first time that one did, mass killings with these kinds of means. So about 50 to 70 people were crowded into those covered vans, and they were killed with carbon monoxide. Yes. So the first such killing, as far as I have learned, happened on Pearl Harbor Day on December 7, 1941. And I have said somewhere in my writing that I don't want to put too much words here, but I have said that Pearl Harbor Day was a very minor blip on the screen of world events. But what happened in Chelmno, that was a convulsion in the Earth's surface. So I'll read a little more from your book. There were row upon row of trucks with improvised canvas tops in Chelmno. And women, men, and even children had been crammed into those trucks. During the short time I was there, you are quoting from an eyewitness, I saw the first truck drive up to the wooden gate. The sentries opened the gates. The truck vanished into the palace courtyard, and immediately afterwards another closed truck came out of the courtyard and headed for the forest. It took about 15 minutes to kill people with carbon monoxide into those vans. Then they would take them out to these mass graves about 5 kilometers away. So can you pause a little there and help us?
Well, that was possibly the beginning of the Holocaust, but not yet the German plan for a total extermination. What happened in Chelmno and in several other places on the in the Russian occupied territories by the Germans, there were tens of those trucks. They were used in a very primitive but efficient way. That is, the exhaust pipe was pushed back into the truck where you had some 60, 70 people, as you said, and the driver, by driving, asphyxiated the inmates in the truck. And another truck came afterwards, and so on. So Chelmno, the trucks in Chelmno were there probably to take the overfill of Jews arriving to the ghetto of Lodz. Lodz today, I guess that's the same name. Why was there an overfill suddenly in the ghetto? Because from Germany, at that time, the German Jews, or a lot of them, were deported to the east from Germany, and from Berlin, München, and so on. And so there was no food in the ghetto and no way of handling all these arrivals. So Globocnik, the SS leader who was in charge of that area, decided, let's kill them. And that's how they brought the trucks there, and that's where the killing by gas started. You had at the same time mass killings by shootings on the whole Eastern Front and in the Baltic countries, occupied all of them by Germans, as you know. So there was no way of escaping there, either these gas vans or the shootings all along. I mean, the shootings were, by the end of the year 41, only in Russia, Russian-occupied German territory, there were some 800,000 Jews murdered by shooting. So the Chelmno gas vans added, but as the person then in charge said after some time, we killed some 100,000. Would there be a good idea to kill also Polish TB patients? The answer from Hitler was no, for the Jews.
So I'm going to just finish that thing about the beginning of the mass killings here on the eyewitness that you are quoting there, Heinz May, he says that there was no longer the slightest doubt that terrible things never before known in human history, were being played out there. So I will go to another one.
Yeah.
Your concept, redemptive anti-Semitism, I think you have coined that term. I think that is because you put the Holocaust in another category. It's not your garden variety anti-Semitism, and you say that Hitler perceived his mission as a kind of crusade to redeem the world by eliminating the Jews.
Yeah.
And that he is a sort of savior figure. So maybe you could...
He considered himself as such. He considered himself as sent by the providence, whatever that meant for him. He was not a religious person, but he believed that there was a higher force which sent him to redeem the world, or to redeem the Aryan race, which is what counted for him, and in particular the German Aryans. And that he thought from early on. He got that from various sources, Houston Stuart Chamberlain and others. And he spewed this out already in the 20s, so that it was the background, let's say, of his folly, but he was far from mad. He was mad in this sense, but otherwise he was a very clever politician, and unfortunately went very far. But in any case, the background is pretty clear from his first speeches and so on. But then it went together with this racial idea, that is selection of the strongest, the best. But here is a danger, the Jewish danger, the Jewish whatever, evil. And he had to save the race. So in order to save the race, ultimately, or to redeem the race, which was partly corrupted already, he had to deal with the Jews. And he mentioned extermination, not in those words, but he mentioned he would go to the utmost consequences if there was a world war. He said that in 1935 already. So he had what he thought exactly, we do not know, of course. That he wanted the worst for the Jews of the world was clear. But how he thought of dealing with it was not clear. In 1935, the Germans, the Reich was still the borders which we know more or less. And as the Nazis occupied Austria in 1938, and then the Czech state in 1939, and then attacked Poland in the end of 1939, September 1939, there were more and more Jews in Hitler's hands, mostly in Poland. There was 3 million Jews in Poland. So here he had now, under his domination, millions, at that time, let's say 4 million Jews. Then the West came, smaller communities, but France, Belgium, Holland, where they killed almost the whole Jewish community. So he had these millions of Jews under his domination. The question was what to do with them. In my opinion, there was no clear plan of mass extermination until the end of 1941. I will explain why, if you allow me. Until then, the war had gone very well for the Germans. They had occupied the whole West, more or less, except Switzerland, Sweden. That's that. Norway was occupied. And then the attack on the Soviet Union, at the beginning, it went very well. In June 1941, it started, and the Germans, as you know, arrived almost to Moscow, but they couldn't get to Moscow into the city, but they were very close. They were in the suburbs of Moscow. But what made probably the major change was the entry of the United States into the war. In December, after Pearl Harbor, Hitler himself declared war on the United States, this Jewish kind of place. Roosevelt and his Jews. Roosevelt had done everything possible to help the British from the autumn of 1940 onwards, and then to make life as difficult as possible for the Germans in the Atlantic Ocean by having incidents, constant incidents with, it was a kind of guerrilla war between the United States and Germany on the naval front mostly. And then the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. Hitler had a pact with Japan. He decided that he would not abandon his ally alone against this horrible country, the United States, and declared war on the United States. Whether he knew what that meant for Germany or not, we don't know. My impression is that he had a vague idea, but he also was convinced that the Jews were around Roosevelt and were pushing Roosevelt against Germany. In any case, December 41, Pearl Harbor, Germany declares war on the United States. And I think that at that moment, Hitler understood that the war would be a very long one and not just a blitzkrieg, which he imagined at the beginning. So if the war was to be a long one, the internal danger, the internal enemy within the German Empire had to be liquidated. It was too dangerous to have those Jews who were still alive, partly, within the empire in that long and dangerous war. And so the decision probably of exterminating all of them, simply killing them, was taken sometime at the end of 41. Goebbels speaks about that the Führer said, the World War is here, now the consequences. And it demanded some time to plan exactly. And so the extermination in the extermination camps, not the trucks anymore, but camps with gas chambers. And they were built, Belzec, all on Polish territory, Belzec, Sobibor, Treblinka, Auschwitz. Auschwitz was parallel. Some of them were using exhaust gas, like with diesel motors, and then they moved to Cyclone B in Auschwitz. I mean, technicalities, but people came, trains came. Those who came from Poland directly, let's say, to Treblinka, traveled. All those who came from the West came in normal trains, in normal coaches, and they arrived to, let's say, Auschwitz. There was a selection on arrival, left, right, left, right.
Yeah. I want to back up a little to about the response in the population, and especially the Christian response. So just here is one quotation, and so I think Bonhoeffer is rightly admired, but he is not extremely, this is not a very attractive thing, what he says here. The state's measure against the Jewish people are concerned in a very special way with the church. In the Church of Christ, we have never lost sight of the idea that the chosen people who nailed the Savior of the world to the cross must bear the curse of the action through the long history of suffering.
But if I may say a word, because Bonhoeffer is considered as a saintly person.
Yes.
And relatively he was within a church that was much more extreme.
Yes, but there is still a residue of that myth, that sort of, yes, the chosen people killed the Savior of the world. And I think that it is instructive, at least for us to remember that here is the The Barmen Declaration in 1934, the first national meeting of the Confession Church took place in Barmen. Not a word was uttered about the persecutions. This time, not even the converted Jews were mentioned. The Barmen Declaration, the confession, that was outside the main evangelical church. They were a church of protest. They said that the Jews should be treated equally with Christians or with Aryans inside the church, but they didn't say anything about how Jews should be treated as citizens of the state. That is where I just wish to acknowledge something about that in the sort of Christian response.
Yeah. Well, I think you, for fairness' sake, you should distinguish between, I speak of Germany now, German Christians, which were Nazis, and the confessing church,
Yes.
the Bekennende Kirche, which were anti, but were afraid to express themselves beyond a certain point. I mean, I will jump just for one example. There was the Archbishop of Berlin, Preising, was a very remarkable person in many ways, Catholic. And he wrote a letter. He tried to organize some, it's later in the war, and he knew everything about extermination. And he attempted to organize a group of prelates who would write to Hitler. So he wrote to Hitler's secretary, let's put it that way, Meissner, I think, and got an answer: stop meddling or you will regret it or something, and he stopped. That is, courage went to a point. And some people like Bonhoeffer were then executed, but for other reasons. They were part of an opposition to the Nazi regime in general, for national reasons also. So it's very difficult to distinguish what was the reason for the opposition of this person or that person. I wrote the biography of a Christian, remarkable person, Kurt Gerstein,
Yes.
who is considered as a very saintly person by some Protestants. Gerstein, I will say it in 2 or 3 words, was a medical student. He never finished, and also engineering student. And when the war started, he was a Bible, not forscher, but a kind of Bible. He read the Bible to some students and so on. He was active, an active Christian. Well, when the war started, first he was not allowed into the army. He was a homosexual, probably. And then he was allowed, but into the technical gas, whatever, department. And that's how he arrived to the point where he was sent with a truckload of Zyklon B, the gas who was then used in Auschwitz to exterminate, to Belzec. And he was taken, I mean, the gas probably didn't help in Belzec, but he was taken to watch an extermination. And he describes it. And there was a university professor, Pfannenstiel, who was with him, and both separately after the war gave the same story, more or less. Fanon still liked what he saw, actually, and he looked there were ways of looking into the gas chamber, and he said, oh, like in a synagogue, they were yelling, those who were dying. Like in a synagogue, they cry or something. So that was one aspect. Gerstein noted on his watch, on his chronometer, 20 minutes, they are not dead, and so on, because the diesel stopped from time to time. It didn't work very well, but they died ultimately. So Gerstein tried to go to the Vatican delegate in Berlin to tell him what was happening, was thrown out of the Nunciatura. He tried the Swiss embassy, was thrown out. He came with his SS uniform. He was in the Waffen-SS, in the technical SS, if you want. And only at the end of the war did he write 3 reports, which are more or less identical, gave them to the American occupying forces. He was imprisoned by the Americans shortly, then moved over to the French for some reason, probably because the family came from the French occupation zone, sent to Paris, put in a prison as a war criminal because he dealt with the gas, and committed suicide in prison. So there is a center in his memory in Westphalia for those who are interested.
Yeah. So there is a strong statement here in the years of extermination, that at the beginning of that book that I think we should read. You say, not one social group, not one religious community, not one scholarly institution or professional association in Germany and throughout Europe declared its solidarity with the Jews. Some of the Christian churches declared that converted Jews were part of the flock up to a point. Thus, Nazi and related anti-Jewish policies could unfold to their most extreme levels without the interference of any major countervailing interest. That is a very strong and serious statement.
I think that for Germany it is true, but again, I don't want so many years afterwards to be too harsh. People were also very afraid. I mean, if you did anything, if you said that, you had to be quite heroic to stand up and protest, because one did it, but now the name, in any case, a vicar in the cathedral, in the Berlin cathedral, said in church, Catholic, let's pray for the Jews when the deportation started. He was denounced by 2 parishioners, put in prison, then sent to Dachau and died on the way, was killed on the way, probably. Bernhard Lichtenberg. And this is one of the rare people, a prelate, a Catholic prelate, who stood up and said, let's pray for the Jews, which was deadly dangerous. Well, he was killed. And very few dared to do that.
Yeah.
Very few.
So I think at the end of your second volume, there is a very arresting statement that that I have read many times, and I have quoted you in stuff I have written on these subjects. You say that at the end, one of the most criminal political leaders in history was about to put an end to his life. This is 1945. There is no point in probing once more the mind of Adolf Hitler or the twisted emotional sources of his murderous obsessions. It has been attempted many times without success. However, the significant and unavoidable historical question, the one that we briefly addressed in the introduction and repeatedly throughout the volume, has to be restated and reconsidered at the end. I want to read the rest of that statement too. Because here you post the question. The major question that challenges all of us is not what personality traits allowed an unknown corporal of the Great War to become the all-powerful leader Adolf Hitler, but rather why tens of millions of Germans blindly followed him to the end, why many still believed in him at the end, and not a few after the end. It is the nature of the Führerbindung, this bond to the Führer, to use Martin Broszat's expression, that remains historically significant, maybe existentially significant too. I just wonder how that looks to you now in some years after you wrote that.
So many years, but I don't see any clearer. I mean, it was a mass hysteria. And man, if there had been television at that time, there was, but a very small scale. If there had been, he probably would never have reached. But on the radio, in the radio years, and in person, in those huge rallies, he had a kind of an impact which came from him, but came from the crowd. They waited for a savior. And that's the most dangerous thing.
But that statement, I have felt a need to introspect. It makes me think, how was it, the people fell for that. So there is a historical element to it, and there is a psychological element. And then I wonder if there is an existential element that carries over to next generation and next generation. You may not want to go there, and I'm not asking you to go there, but I am confessing that it has occurred to me to think, how was that possible? And how are we safe today?
No.
No. So I want to, here is, you were the recipient of the John and Catherine MacArthur Foundation Award in 1999, I think, and you were interviewed in LA Times. And they wrote, you are saying that so few had the inner steel to stand by what they believed to be right. That is what you learn studying this material. It comes down to the core of a person. That is, I read that you said that to the LA Times some years ago, and I wonder if you would comment on that.
Well, I am sorry, but that shows you. Can you repeat your question?
Yes, I was referring to the time when you received the MacArthur Foundation Prize, and that helped you write one of your books. And at that time, there was an interview with LA Times, and you were saying about, having the inner steel, that it comes down to the core of a person.
Having the...
Yeah, that you learn from the Holocaust.
Yes. Yes.
I suppose what is it that made it possible for people to resist? That's how I understand it.
What made it possible for people to resist
Yes,
at the time?
yes. You say it comes down to the inner core of a person.
Yes. But very few were able to resist. So if that's the gist of the question, I don't know what makes a hero. But at the time, resistance, not in peripheral occupied countries. Norway, we know about Norwegian resistance, but in Germany, it was very flimsy because people were so afraid, and those who resisted in the... That's the sad thing, that those who did resist and were killed in 1944 were people who resisted from deep nationalistic grounds, who were not pro-Nazi, but certainly not against the regime for many years, and ultimately did resist because they saw that Germany was going to a catastrophe. And that's what brought them. So when they were caught, those who were caught, and there were many, tens of them, from Canaris, the head of the Abwehr, the intelligence service, to various officers and so on, those who were not shot on the spot, when they were put in front of the People's Court, as the court was called, they all expressed, well, we wouldn't have gone so far as the regime went regarding the Jews, for example. But yes, I mean, they were all hesitant. In a way, nobody except Lichtenberg, whom I quoted before, and very few were clear about their resistance. They resisted because they saw Germany was going to perish at the end of the war. They were right, of course. So they paid with their lives. But through moral resistance on moral grounds, very few. And I'm not sure that today we are much more courageous. That is what you meant from generation to generation. I don't know. We don't, I hope not. But I don't know who among us, including myself, at this ripe age, would be ready to stand, you know.
So when I initiated contact with Professor Friedlander in the fall, and we started talking about you might be willing to come here, and I asked you for an hour and a half, and your beloved wife, Orna, she said, well, the next day I heard back from you, and she said, no, it will be 1 hour. So I had to promise, it would be 1 hour, and we are at our hour, so I will try to keep my promise. But I would like to go back one last time to you. And this sentence in an interview with you, or a feature in Der Spiegel in 2017, I think you say, meine Heimat ist meine Geschichte. History is my home. So that is quite a poignant statement, because you have moved around many places. You have taught in Jerusalem, in Tel Aviv, in Geneva, and finally in Los Angeles. You have in some ways been, not been settled, and maybe you still aren't. Your history is your home, in a sense. just wondered if we could end on, if you would say something on that.
To put it in more simple terms, I want to maybe say in a very few words, I wasn't aware of the weight of the past for many years. I came to Geneva after working for the government in Israel, and I decided to go back to my graduate studies. I had done the undergraduate in Paris, then worked for years, and then came back to Geneva for my PhD. And Geneva is 20 minutes from Saint-Jean-Gulf, where my parents were arrested. I came back to Geneva, where they never could get to. So in a way, it could be an unconscious meeting place or not. I'm not such a good psychologist. But the fact is, I didn't go to Saint-Jean-Gulf for 20 years. It never occurred to me to go to see the place, which shows you also quite a resistance. I started getting closer to the past via not my PhD, which was diplomatic history, but via Nazi Germany and the United States between 1939 and 1941. But then I found that documents about the Pope, Pius XII, in the German archive. So I wrote about Pius XII and the Third Reich, a book which was quite, at the time, it was published in 1964. It was well known at the time. And that was already my own history without really being aware of it. The Catholic Church in Nazi Germany and the Pope's silence in front of the Holocaust. And from then on, more and more, I got closer and closer to the past, if you wish. And finally, it's because of a visit a year in Germany and a clash with several German historians, but pretty bad, Ernst Nolte and then, anyway, Martin Brochard, that I decided to write the general history, which you have here, the 2 volumes. And then I was totally, and that's how I came to Los Angeles, because UCLA had a chair for the history of the Holocaust, and they asked me if I would like to be incumbent, and I said yes, and so on. So that's it.
You have been very generous to come here. We are so grateful that you would do this for us. We are grateful to your wife, Orna. We are just...
Thank you.
He loves music, and we will stay for the music.
As our program draws to a close, we want to thank Professor Friedlander once again for sharing with us your story, reminding us of the horrors of the Holocaust. Thank you so much. And thank you all for coming. I think we've all been inspired to be prophetic. It seems to me that Professor Friedlander has called each of us to have that steel to respond and do what is right in our world today. Maybe that be the case for each of us. As you leave, there will be an offering being taken by the deacons at the back. So if you've enjoyed this event and would like to contribute and sponsor to events such as these taking place on a regular basis, please give generously. Once again, thank you for coming.